Job chapter number 3 is where we are tonight. Job chapter number 3. Job curses his day. That's really what Job chapter number 3 is about. Which, as you're turning there, Job chapter number 3, it stands in contrast. Everything leading up to this is Job is very considerate and thoughtful about not cursing his day and not cursing God. Not cursing God. Anyway, Job chapter 3. We'll read this chapter down to verse number 26. Follow along as I read. It says, "After this opened Job his mouth and cursed his day. And Job spake and said, Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, There is a man-child conceived. Let that day be darkness. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined unto the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Lo, let the night be solitary. Let no joyful voice come therein. Let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. Let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark. Let it look for light, but have none. Neither let it see the dawning of the day, because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from mine eyes. Why did I not die? Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Why did the knees prevent me, or why the breasts that I should suck? For now should I have lain still and been quiet. I should have slept. Then had I been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth, which built desolate places for themselves, or with princes that had gold, who had filled their houses with silver, or as an hidden untimely birth I had not been, as infants which never saw light. There the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary be at rest. There the prisoners rest together. They hear not the voice of the oppressor. The small and great are there, and the servant is free from his master. Wherefore is light given to him that is in misery, and life unto the bitter in soul, which long for death, but it cometh not, and dig for it more than for hid treasures, which rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they can find the grave. Why is light given to a man whose way is hid, and whom God hath hedged in? For my sighing cometh before I eat, and my roarings are poured out like the waters. For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me. I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came." It's Job's opening monologue, finally after a period of silence, 7 days of silence really, then this speaks. And Job speaks this statement, his first thoughts to his 3 friends, 4, but 3 that we mentioned here. Comments, thoughts, or feedbacks from this chapter? I don't know if you've read it before, or you've read ahead, or you have initial thoughts. I'll give you the opportunity here tonight, and be prepared next week. Next week is chapter 4 and 5 we'll take together. Jackie. Yeah, it might be a little bit beyond the chapter as well. Yeah, absolutely. Ross.
Well, I mean, it goes without saying that he's in extreme deep depression. But what is also maybe not so obvious is that in verse 25, where he says, "For the things which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid is come unto me." What that tells me is that you need to be really, really careful what you think about and what you dwell on. If you dwell upon the, doom and gloom, if you dwell upon darkness, rather than dwelling upon the blessings of the Lord, then it doesn't end well.
Yeah. I'll say more on that later in my notes. Josh, were you going to
of, not the effects of sin, but just evil to have an effect on his life. But yeah, that's sort of stood out to me in that sort of chapter.
Yeah. There's differing opinions on that verse. Some say exactly what you guys just said then, that he feared the evil that comes. Others say that it was like the one thing that he feared in that day when it was the next person coming and the next person, that his groanings turned to sighings, to fears, to being afraid. It was just like compounding one after the other. Either way, it's the depth of the misery that he is searching there. Connor?
I'll just try out there. I was just thinking while you were reading. Could it be that where the questioning comes in, he starts questioning the day and he starts questioning God? Could it be that the day he feared was when you question God? You know?
I thought about that as well.
Yeah.
Is that what he fears? Fears to getting into such a state where he's questioning God, or tempted to question God, maybe as well. Yeah, there's different thoughts, and that's another one that was also came up in the commentaries that I was reading. Cahill.
The interesting thing I found about that verse as well, or verse 26, he says, "I was not in safety," which is actually not true, because he was in safety, because even the devil recognized that God had made Job safe. He had protected him.
Had a hedge.
Yeah, so it's like almost when you're going through, when bad things come upon you, you can then think like, oh man, I was never in safety. I never was being protected, where God was actually protecting him the whole time. And then, obviously he removed his protection from him, and then it happened to him. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of things about verse 25, even when I was studying it a few weeks ago, that make me question. Like the verse that I think of when I read verse 25, it says, "For the thing which I have greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me." I can't find a verse I can't think of the verse off the top of my head, but maybe think of a verse in Proverbs. Or it says, "The fear of the wicked shall come upon him." The fear of the wicked shall come upon him. And then I was reading about Job, where he was a righteous man. So, I just find it a bit sort of like, obviously they don't contradict each other because the Bible doesn't do that. But I think there's a lot more in that verse than what just face value, like what we would think it to understand. But the other thing that I noticed in this verse that stuck out to me more than anything, or in this chapter, was verse number 1. Because it shows Job's breaking point. And he was an unbelievable man. He was an amazing man, and the Lord says it time and time again, and we see how he reacts in such a godly way and worships God when he gets the bad news. And even when he's really sick, he's still in a good way. But after those 7 days of silence, that's his breaking point. And that tells me that everyone has a breaking point. Every single Christian has a point where they break and they begin to question God and say, like, what's going on here, I just that verse stuck out to me in chapter 3, verse number 1.
Yeah, there's two other verses as well that I, studying it, realised, just kind of puts to a little bit more of a context into Job's sufferings, is that it was months between these monologues, well, they're not monologues, dialogues, and what actually had taken place, because in chapter 3, chapter 7 and verse 3, it says, So am I made to possess months of vanity, and wearisome nights are appointed to me. And then in another verse he talks about months. So it is like there is months of this trial that he is going through. Then there's this period of 7 days of silence, and then and the first thing that he comes out of his mouth after all of that is to curse his day, which is interesting because everything leading up to this is about cursing. If you remember what he was trying to cover for his children, his sons, he was offering sacrifices lest they had cursed God in their hearts. Then you have Satan come along and say, right, you take away the hedge of protection and he'll curse you to your face. He'll curse you. Twice he says, you take away his health, he'll curse you. And then his wife comes along and says, just curse God and die. So everything about this is about cursing God, and in the very first moment that comes out of his mouth, he curses the day. that he was born. So he doesn't curse God, which flows in with what it says in chapter 1 and verse 22. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. So what does it mean to curse? Well, it would be to charge God foolishly, which is what it means to curse. Where he says, cursing means to utter a wish of evil against one, to imprecate evil upon, to call for mischief or injury to fall upon, to execrate. So when you curse someone, you want evil to happen to them. That's what it means to curse someone. We have it with foul language and cursing. And to curse God is to blaspheme rather than to praise God in those moments, which is what I mentioned before, Pastor Harris, when he was going through that bowel cancer. It was a bowel cancer that he had. The cancer that he had, and in such pain from that cancer, in the middle of the night, was on his knees giving praise to God, lest he would curse with his mouth and say, God, why? And kind of charge God foolishly. He, in that moment, got on his knees and may have cursed the cancer or cursed his day or cursed being born as well, but not God. Didn't charge God foolishly for it. And it says here that that Job opened his mouth and cursed his day. He rued the day. He didn't rue God. He rued the day that he was born, which is what he's really going on about. This chapter is really about death, which he's saying. But I'm not sure if I go the depression route, though, because David was depressed and he wished to die. Elijah got to a place where he was depressed and wished to die from coming down from the mountains. Job doesn't necessarily wish to die. He rather just wishes he wasn't born, which is sort of semantics a little bit, but he is saying that his life is so miserable, he wished that he wasn't, he wished he could erase the whole thing. People who want to die want to end it. He doesn't necessarily want to end it, he wished he didn't start it, which is saying then this life is miserable the whole way through, and which is why he says in this lamentation, it's a lamentation, it's a cry for an escape. He wants to just escape, which I guess is what he's saying. He's trying to get out of this thing. And the first 10 verses are about his birth. Man, he said, I rue the day, the day, verse 3, let the day perish wherein I was born, the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived or brought forth. There's a man-child, such excitement. He says, I regret that day. Wish that day never happened. I wish that was erased from the calendar. I wish the stars and the darkness just enveloped it and there was no light on that day and it just did not exist. Which is what he goes on in verse 10, because it shut me not, let the stars, verse 9, let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark, let it look for light, but have none, neither let it see the dawning of the day, because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from mine eyes. So he's just wishing that he was never born. Such was the heaviness and the heartache of his sorrow. Absolutely. Which is why you get down to verse number 11, which is right after this. There's 5 whys. Why did I not die from the womb? Yeah, like the question, like which is really what people do in suffering. Like, if you could just get a reason for why it's happening, that often can be enough to get you through. But not knowing the why adds an extra element of heartache and misery that he wished could be removed, but didn't know the why, and God doesn't give the why. And he says, why did I not die from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Why did the knees prevent me? Or why the breasts that I should suck? For now should I have lain still and been quiet. I should have slept. Then had I been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth. So he's asking these questions of why. Absolutely. He wanted to know why. And then he talks about death. He says, why did I not die? Then verse 17, there the wicked ceased from troubling. There, he's saying the grave. In death, in the grave, there, the wicked are no longer troubling people. Silence from the wicked. He says there, in death, the weary are at rest. We know that at times when someone who has been suffering for a long time and they have illness for a long time and then they pass, we say finally they are at rest. They're contemplating the same thing. Surely if death comes, death is a good thing, he's saying. From the predicament that he's in, death is this desirous thing. He desires death. He says, there the wicked cease from troubling. There the wicked be at rest. There the prisoner rest together. They hear not the voice of the oppressor. The small and great are there, and the servant is free from his master. He's saying, man, if death could just come, I'd be free from all of this. And the why is, well, why do I go through this? And he goes on to ask, why is the misery? Which verse is that? Verse 23. Why is light given to a man whose way is hid? No, that's not the right one. Is it 20? Oh, yeah, wherefore is light given to him that is in misery, and life unto the bitter in soul? If he's saying, if life is going to be miserable, why does God, which is the fifth why does God give life even at the very beginning if the life is going to be miserable? Which how many people ask that question today? Have a terrible quality of life, and they say, well, why should I even exist if life is going to be miserable? And is there an answer to that? Job was questioning that. And one of the things I've wrestled with this is that I don't want to get to all these chapters which are just left with miserable contemplations and not give any kind of hope. But I'll give you a little bit of hope tonight as we close up and take this chapter as Job starts off his Lamentations. Is go to James. We have hindsight from all of this. And James uses the story of Job for our learnings. And in James chapter number 5, he talks about patience. He says you need patience to suffer through and endure the struggles and trials of life, whatever they may be. James is dealing with this same very topic, and he says this. He says you need to have patience because it is, but I was trying to find the one before it where he talks about the farmer. Chapter 5, be patient, it is said, verse 7. Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth. So the farmer plans his field, plans his crop, and then he has to have patience and wait for that to bring forth. He says, waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and have long patience for it, until he receive the early and the latter rain. Be ye also patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge not one against another, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth at the door. Take, my brethren, the prophets, who have spoken in the time of the Lord, for an example of suffering, affliction, and patience. So he says, right, think of the farmer. He was patient, and the fruit and the reward came after much waiting at the very end. Then he talks about the prophets. Consider the prophets, who also endured much suffering and much conflict and much heartache. And he says, who have spoken in the name of the Lord for an example of suffering, affliction, and patience. Verse 11, behold, we count them happy which endure. We hold them up and say, these are great men of God. They endured there. These prophets went through great, hard, and difficult times. And they kept their faith with God. We count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. And so we might ask the question, as Job asks the question, he doesn't have the answer at that particular stage, but we have hindsight to look back, and we have the authority of the Word of God to say, look at Job. His sufferings, though in his moment he couldn't understand and he wished that he wasn't born, he says, but the end of it ultimately is that God is good. He is merciful and he is pitiful. He's not arbitrarily just torturing Job. There's a purpose in it. And a purpose through it, though Job doesn't understand it and it's not always clear what it is. But James says, just consider Job. He was patient. You have heard of the patience of Job and have seen the end of the Lord. Through Job, the end of it is that God is pitiful and he is of tender mercy. So we can go through the trials and the struggles, and while Job is saying, why would a person of misery be born at all? But there is purpose in it, and there is joy at the end of it, to serve God and to trust God. And this life is misery, but I can tell you this, the life which is to come is going to, the joy of the life which is to come is going to so blanket out what misery there is in this life, that'll be gone from the memory. Is it Isaiah that says, what's the verse in Isaiah? That the former things will be remembered no more. How about that for a promise? That the miseries and the heartaches and the hurts that we go through on a daily basis, and sometimes on a rotation basis, perpetually it seems, will be remembered no more. Job's not going to be in heaven thinking about all the miseries that he went through. He's going to be thinking about the glories of heaven. It is absolutely the difference between heaven and hell. That rich man, when he lifted up his eyes, could only think of all the things that he messed up in this life. But in heaven, no memory. The former things will be remembered no more. And Job sings, this misery right now is hard, and sometimes I wish for death. But the end, as James tells us, God is pitiful and he is merciful. And the reward is good at the end, though it may be.
Here on earth, over time, there is healing, and we don't remember with the same angst and bitterness bad things that have happened to us.
Yep.
We can look back and say, well, yeah, and I've come through, and I understand, and I've grown.
Absolutely.
So it's not just when we go to heaven.
That's true. That is true. And Job latter end was blessed, but Cottle and I were talking about this just before. His latter end was blessed, and he had more children, and he was wealthier. His daughters were the fairest in the land. I mean, he was just greatly blessed, and more so, and his latter end was bigger than his former. And he was. But Cottle made a good point that I think the pain of losing his children, those scars still go with him all the way through life. Like, I don't think it's, you come to terms with it, yeah. But I think in heaven, it's not just that you come to terms with it, it's not even there. Like, that memory doesn't even come back, and I think that's a pleasant thought this side of heaven. So, yeah.
There's no such thing as closure. It's only acceptance of what's happened.
Yeah, it's like I said a couple of weeks ago when we were dealing with what he was going through and using Pastor Bill Prater, who lost his son TJ, who had the pickup truck fall on him, and at 32 years of age or whatever, left behind a wife and small children. And he says, when he counsels people with grief, and he says, people are always saying that there'll come a time when you get over this. And he says, you don't get over that. He says, but you said you can get through what you will never get over. And that's a good way of putting it. And I was with a lady, Leela French, dear lady at Southwest Baptist Church. They lost their son. And before even I came along, I think. But even to this day, they go to the grave and they mourn his loss decades later. And they can get through something that they never get over. And Job has probably got through at the end. He gets through probably some things that he'll never get over. But the grace of God helps him through it. We'll leave it off there tonight. Read chapters 4 and 5, and there's some other more deep thoughts worth our exploration and our